Hare Krishna, we're back with Todd Desmond, Mr. X behind the camera. This is his ingenious artistic idea of a frame for this movie. And I'm going to pick up where we left off from the last segment, where I said that Euripides' tragic play, the Bacchae, is the undercurrent of Plato's most famous dialogue, the Republic. The ultimate intention I am arguing that Plato had by incorporating this literary parallel is to indicate that the spiritual sun, the idea of the good, the original form from which all existence radiates, is simultaneously a personal God. And the nature of the God is indicated by the manner in which the God is presented in the Republic, which is by being hidden. But point for point, the plot structure of the Republic parallels this play about this trickster God who comes back from India in disguise as a human being, not revealing his divinity until the end, to the king of the town, Thebes, Pentheus, who denies the divinity of the god and is really denying the validity of traditional religion in general. And a super skeptic, rational person, King Pentheus, has Dionysus arrested, put and interrogated about his religion. When Dionysus refuses to cow to the intimidation of the king throws him in the dungeon. The god creates an earthquake, reveals himself again to the king, tries to convince him to rectify his disbelief in Dionysus. The king refuses to do that, is going to have his army go out and kill the women of his own town, Thebes, because they have been possessed by the god, Dionysus, and have subsequently been wreaking havoc around the town. Kidnapping children, ripping cows and bulls to shreds, generally behaving in a mad, Bacchic way. So, as a last resort, Dionysus says to the king, well, you suspect me of seducing the women of the town into some kind of a sexual orgy, a frenzy of lust and wine drinking, because Dionysus is also the god of wine, which is also a symbol for spiritual intoxication. And so Dionysus says to the young man, well, maybe you would prefer to see these orgies with your own mother and aunts and the women of your town, naked and frolicking on Mount Cithaeron. Would you like to see this? And then suddenly a shift happens in Pentheus' mind. Yes, actually, I would like to see this. There's nothing I would pay a greater price to see. Dionysus says, well, then you should probably dress up like one of the women so that they don't recognize you, because obviously they're violent. They've been ripping cows to shreds with their bare hands. Pentheus agrees. He dresses like a woman. Dionysus lures him out to Mount Cithaeron, where he can spy on his own, the women of his town, including his own mother. He gets magically, Dionysus pulls a large pine tree to the ground, puts Pentheus at the tip of it, releases him so he can tower over and spy on what he thinks will be an orgy. In fact, the women of the town then hear a magical voice from the sky. Presumably Dionysus is telling them to kill this intruder upon their sacred right. They throw sticks and stones at him. They rip the tree up from the ground with their supernatural strength. And in the end, they rip Pentheus to shreds, bit by bit, and decapitate him. And then his mother comes back to the town of Thebes with the head of her own son stuck on her symbol of the god, a wand, a thyrsus it is called, and then finally is brought to her senses and realizes what she has done. Then Dionysus reveals himself as a god. The moral of the story is, do not deny the divinity of the god, or you could get torn to shreds like King Pentheus. It's a classic tragic play. It was performed on stage to the accompaniment of music. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche pointed to these kinds of plays as the culmination of Greek culture, during which the Dionysian will of the universe, the cosmic force that thrusts the flowers from the ground and gives the vigor to every living thing, is most manifest. That humans can channel this divine power in a most distilled way, and in a most beautiful and powerful way, through that tragic plays that they were conducting. And it's also a fact that Plato, before he met Socrates, wanted to be a tragic playwright. but then Socrates pointed him to the path of philosophical conversation as a superior way to care for the soul, by constantly questioning oneself and others about the nature of the soul, the nature of virtue, how a soul should behave in order to guarantee it acts justly, that it doesn't suffer from unjust acts. But in the Republic is the most famous dialogue in which Plato attacks tragic and comic plays. As I said in the previous video clip, that it wasn't at first the case. So now I'm going to go over the plot structure of the Republic to show how it parallels Euripides' play while overtly denying the entire Euripides' play. By doing that, by advocating this Dionysian worship in the process of evicting it from the utopian ideal of the city, is actually a more potent way of describing the nature of the god. Plato isn't only telling you what the god is like, he's demonstrating it through this literary parallel, denying the god in the very process of advocating the god. It's a mind game to teach you that the god's a playful entity, this flute-playing god, which more appropriately, in my opinion, be described as God with a capital G, because this is the origin. If Dionysus is a symbol of the spiritual sun, he is the origin of all being. And not only he, since he is the union of all opposites, he is also a she. A more apt definition of Plato's idea of the god would be the union of Dionysus and the Bacchae, his devotees, the feminine element of the Dionysian god complex. So in the Republic, it begins, as did Euripides' play, with the arrest of Socrates. As Euripides returned from Asia, and most likely India, through the Bactrian lands and through all the lands of the former Persian Empire, he comes to Thebes and drives the women mad and is arrested by the king, who sends out his soldiers, who are really his slaves since he's a tyrant, to arrest the god. In the beginning of the Republic, Socrates is returning from a religious ritual for the goddess. The goddess's name isn't mentioned. Bendis is one of the goddesses that scholars have said it might have been. At any rate, returning from this religious sacrifice, he is arrested by a slave boy sent by the oligarchic young man Polemarchus. Now, it's important for some background of this story. Plato wrote this in about, at any rate, after 399 BC, which is when Socrates was executed. Plato didn't write his dialogues using Socrates as his mouthpiece until after Socrates was executed. Several years before Socrates was executed, Athens lost the war to the Spartans, the Peloponnesian War. In the aftermath of that, the Spartans funded an oligarchic revolution, as a result of which Pentheus was killed, not Pentheus, Polemarchus, who I'm paralleling with Pentheus, by some of Socrates' associates. So the parallel is, as Dionysus had Pentheus killed by his bacchantes, some believe Socrates had Polemarchus killed by his devotees, some of his philosophical students. I'm going to leave it there for now and come back with it to this parallel between Plato's Republic and the Bacchae in the next video clip. Hare Krishna.